All right.
Oh, we're so cozy, Michael.
Let's kick this off. So first thing, I think probably most people know Berachain, have heard of it, maybe showed up to a club once or twice. But let's just kick things off for those that don't know. Let's describe Berachain in your own words.
Yeah, for sure. Alrighty, so there are bears, this might be evident, but Berachain itself is an EVM identical L1 powered by proof of liquidity. And what it really does at the end of the day is it allows liquidity to serve as a source of security for the chain and to power the applications that are built on top of it.
And one of the things that I think a lot of people think about when it comes to Berachain is the lore around the bears. I mean, look at the stage right now. Let's talk about the lore. You know, how would you describe kind of the combination of lore into the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that there's two camps. There's those that have a little bit of an idea of like the founding story of Berachain and what led to a man on a bear mask up here. Others are just like, oh, it's another VC chain, blah blah blah. You know, I hear both sides. The funny part is that Berachain was actually very much a series of happy accidents. We did not intend to build a blockchain. We intended to make a funny NFT collection of bears smoking weed. That kind of evolved out of control very quickly. But I also think that like altruistic entropy, or like that wonderful happenstance of weird events, and the lack of engineering, or the lack of like attempts to manufacture something, is actually what has served us the best over time. So Berachain started for complete shits and giggles in the summer of 2021 by accident, in which my co-founder Papa and I basically, released 100 NFTs of bears with bongs, aptly named the Bong Bears, in a number of DeFi discords. Think like Olympus, Frax, Curve, Alchemics, etc. And we're just like, hey guys, got some fun bears over here. We've seen a bunch of NFTs happening the last little while. Let's see what happens if we try to run with something. And to our surprise, they ended up selling out really quickly. We had a whole bunch of people who were sort of like large in the ecosystem started adopting them, using them as their profile pictures. And we ended up with this weird confluence of like the far left and the far right curve. And that on one side, we just had people who were like, haha, funny bear with a bong, I will buy this. On the other hand, there are people who are like, okay, we've seen these guys in these discords, they understand DeFi, they understand what's going on broadly. Maybe there's something more here. And it turned out there was a little bit more, because we got those bears to multiply over time into more and more collections, basically rewarding the initial holders while increasing distribution. And what we ended up doing very much by accident was building a community of thousands of holders of bears smoking weed that were on one hand, quite DeFi savvy, very on-chain as a whole, but on the other hand, risk-on enough and lackadaisical enough to engage in these, multiplying bear games. And I think after long enough, we chatted with the community. We did the thing where we actually talked to users and developers, which is at times a foreign concept in crypto, and found that there were actually problems that we could solve in the existing chain landscape. We thought to ourselves, right now there's very much a lack of incentive alignment across liquidity and security at the chain level. There's billions of dollars sitting in validator sets on ghost chains with 10 million TVL. Is there a way that we can actually allow A to enable B, as opposed to having them, pitted against each other? Can we turn liquidity into security? Can we give applications a reason to exist in a new ecosystem? And can we allow the chain to actually be in service of its applications? And that lore, along with a lot of bear-related bullshit, is what has gotten us here today.
That's awesome. So you just touched on like 3 or 4 things that I definitely want to talk about, but let's start with one of them initially, which is the concept of the correlation between community and excellence. I think of when I think of community, there's a couple of really good examples in crypto where you have the cult-like following that defines the community, that defines success, the excellence of the chain, and I think that you guys perfectly embody that. But describe a little bit about how you guys think about community and maybe the chicken and egg problem of, is it community or tech that comes first? Which one matters more? But you have to have both to do well. But let's talk through a little bit of community development.
Yeah, for sure. I think the most important thing about community is like maintaining authenticity, right? I think there's a long and sordid history of teams that have tried to incentivize communities into action with promises of alpha and airdrops and all these different ways in which they're going to reward them. But I actually think the best way to actually have a community come together, and the most important thing, is to make people actually believe in something, right? To find something that feels real, tangible, approachable, and something that could play a positive role in their lives. I know that sounds kind of corny, but I also believe there's an element of truth to it, right? I think a lot of people do things for one of 3 reasons. They're trying to get laid, get paid, or have fun. And I think that we index on many of these things, hopefully a lot of the last one of having fun, but like, no issue with the others. And I think that when we think about how the Berachain community has been built, it's been a matter of like planting seeds and letting people who have good intentions run with them. It's never been us saying, hey, go throw this event, or hey, go build this application, or hey, go do this. It's been, hey, this person's pretty cool. Let's talk to them. Let's give them ideas. Let's bounce things around. Let's create a fun environment in which people can actually try things that are a little bit less conventional, a little bit more off the beaten path, and stuff that we actually think has a chance of like breaking out and being accessible to folks. And I think part of that has been like alongside the Berachain branding, right? Like when you look at our website, when you look at Berachain as a whole, it's not meant to come off as intimidating and scary. It's meant to be like, hey, here's a blockchain that people can use. Bears are approachable, but there's actually some really interesting tech under the hood. And I think that combining that with the community ends up being like this incredibly high potential launch pad for just these network effects and these flywheels to take off. As in, strong people, like-minded people who want to perform, attract strong people, right? And I think that if you build an excellent community of folks who are thoughtful, motivated, hardworking, fun, just people who you'd want to go to Thanksgiving dinner with, then I think you end up seeing a lot of just positive externalities in an unintentional manner. And then when you think about that in correlation to the tech, I think that we've seen many groups try to like spin out interesting new technology from an academic institution or a leading research firm or a large enterprise, whatever it might be, and then say, okay, let's throw a whole bunch of money at this to try to make people care about it. And I think there's actually been very, very few examples of that standing the test of time. Because for better or for worse, I believe that blockchains are very much converging on one point in terms of technical thresholds or excellence, and that I believe that within the next couple of years, blockchains will very much feel like classic Web 2 experiences in terms of UX, in terms of usability, in terms of just pleasant feelings of use. But actually, what they haven't really been differentiated on much yet is brand. Is what comes to mind when you think about this chain? What defines it? What are its principles, its values? What is the ethos of that ecosystem? And I think that is where we try to spend a lot more time. And I think that's where the community becomes a major force for good.
Yeah, so one of the things, and granted, the chain hasn't launched yet. We're getting closer. One thing we were talking about beforehand was we're really good in the industry of making these shooter high moments, like these things that attract people. They come in, they dump TVL, they sign up for something, get some tokens, then run away. How do you think about building the authentic staying power of community versus something that might look and feel more like a sugar high?
Yeah, I think that there's like very few alternatives to time and effort, right? And again, kind of corny, but the fact of the matter is Berachain's been around for almost 3 years in some shape or form, right? And I think that over that time, there's been a lot of trust built with those initial community members. In fact, if you were to look at the first 100 people in the Discord, I would say that probably close to a quarter, or I'd say maybe even approaching a third of them, have gone on to start building projects or founding things on the chain. One of the first girls in our Discord, Keisha, went and founded the Bera Baddies, which has now become like, a fun presence at all these events and a great force for women in crypto. One of the first dudes has gone and founded a project called Goldilocks, which raised money from a bunch of good firms. Like there are so many examples of those initial community members just going out and building exciting new things and actually taking something across the line, right? So I think that to directly answer your question, the way that you keep it real and the way that it survives over a long term is by doing right by the community, not just bending to one's will and saying the community is always right, because in many cases they are wrong. But I think it's about fairness. I think it's about setting expectations reasonably. And I think it's about trying to ensure that the actions taken by the chain or the people guiding the chain's development are really in service of users at the end of the day. And that is really the whole idea of proof of liquidity. It's can we put power in the hands of applications who in turn are really there to help give users wonderful experiences. Because we can circle joke over the most inaccessible, best tech ever for years to come. But if we don't build products that people want, then it's ultimately all useless, right? And that's really what Berachain is here for more than anything else. One other thing that has come to mind around the community side is like this importance of a hazing or a trauma bonding event, right? I think almost every major chain that has survived the test of time has had some event where they just get absolutely sucker punched. So Bitcoin had Mt. Gox, Ethereum had the DAO hack, Solana had FTX. I think for us, there will certainly be something. One could perhaps argue that waiting for a chain for 3 years has been the trauma bonding event, but I'm sure there's another one down the road. And I think that just having people that care and putting those people on pedestals, letting them build their own platforms, letting them form their own tribes, and letting that set of entropy heavy events carry out in a good way.
Yep, bonded through trauma. It happens. So one of the things you mentioned earlier and then just now is proof of liquidity. And one of the kind of core memes narratives that's going on in the industry right now is all about alignment. And I think proof of liquidity is kind of the exact example of how you would become the most aligned with the base layer and the application layer working together collaboratively. Stakers, app developers have incentives perfectly aligned. Let's talk through a little bit of the nuts and bolts of proof of liquidity. How does it work, and why do you think it's different? I mean, we think it's pretty novel and interesting, but how do you think about it?
Yeah, of course. So the whole tenet of proof of liquidity is that, in order for an ecosystem like Berachain to flourish, right, the applications should actually benefit from living on the chain. And we haven't seen any chain to date that has actually had a sort of a mechanistically, I'd say, embedded manner of driving value to its apps. Sure, there are grant programs, which I think are mercenary, bullshit for the most part, and just encourage bad builders. And there might be, king making done by the foundation or by certain members of the team. But I think that what proof of liquidity tries to optimize for is to allow those who've contributed the greatest amount of tangible value for the ecosystem to actually have the greatest say in its direction over time. What that means practically is that on Berachain, when blocks are produced, BGT, or the Bera governance token, is emitted. BGT is entirely illiquid and cannot be purchased on an exchange, DEX, whatever it might be. The only way to earn it is by actually providing liquidity to governance-approved or whitelisted sources of liquidity on the chain. So this could be pools in the native DEX, or a lending market, or a staking pool within a game, whatever it might be. And over time, more and more of these applications, as determined by those who have contributed liquidity in the first place, can be added to the set of venues that can actually receive emissions from the chain itself. So what proof of liquidity ultimately ends up doing is reducing customer acquisition costs for these apps, increasing capital efficiency, and really driving value towards them and their LPs more than anything else. So what I think is really interesting here is that there actually ends up being a bit of an equivalent exchange. It's not just the chain subsidizing applications, it's those applications then pushing fees or part of their token emissions or some form of value back towards those BGT stakers and the folks who have pushed value to their applications in the first place. So we try to make it as full circle and as sustainable as possible. And when we think about building a real community, and when we think about this idea of alignment, we see a means of that sustaining. So, I think that the idea of Ethereum alignment has been thrown around a bunch. And I would argue that the term has become near, close to toxic at some points, in which it's if you're not Ethereum aligned, you're a bad person. Got to be Ethereum aligned or they're not going to let you in the office type shit. And on our side, we've played with different ideas in the past, but I think that what we see ourselves as most in this alignment paradigm is app layer aligned. Yep. And that Berachain really is meant to be an accelerant for the application layer. And it's the first chain where the validators and the applications and the users work together to let the ecosystem grow. Validators are not pitted against their applications. They're not trying to extract MEV from them. They're there to make sure that they succeed. They're there to help power them. They're there to drive value to them, right? So we think that can really open up some cool new paradigms in terms of how ecosystems interact as a whole.
So going back to the title of the chat, there's obviously a number of applications, tens to hundreds of applications that are building on top of Berachain right now. And proof of liquidity seems to be that kind of interesting beachhead that everyone is getting interested in building on Berachain for. But how do you bridge the gap between, let's say, cults and conglomerates? You've got the cult following, the culture, the memes, the Riz. How do you actually bridge that into institutions, conglomerates that also want to use the chain?
Yeah, I think that the answer actually almost ends up being the same as how we attract developers or users, in that I think that a large portion of the Web 2 industry or these conglomerates that are moving into the space, they recognize brand value, right? They recognize Solana for many reasons because it has a brand, it has a real vibe to it, it has a culture, and it's something that's gotten in the minds and hearts of people. And I think that what we're trying to do is to build something that allows them to recognize a similar feeling from us. Not saying that we're trying to parallel Solana, but what I mean is you want to be recognizable, you want to have something that sticks out from the crowd, and you want to have proof of the ability to actually convert that into something tangible. So on one hand, while having raised capital from yourselves and Brevin Howard and Polychain and Hack and whatnot, and Samsung and Golden Tree and yada 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 is great for us from an institutional de-risking point of view. I actually think what's been most interesting is that a lot of these brands we've interacted with have said, you guys seem to understand what it takes to distribute. Because there's a whole meme first-time founders think about products, second-time founders think about distribution. I think that a lot of what happens with the bears, dude on stage in a bear mask is distribution. And I think that that's also what a lot of these brands end up looking for. A fun aside that I've noticed, especially as we spend more and more time in the Asian market, is that as a result of the bears, a lot of these brands believe that like we understand IP well, which is like really funny because I don't think we're quite there yet, and I'd love to do more and more of that in the future. And I think there's very interesting precedent for how IP can really just spin up its own flywheels. But it also is very cool that having the bear as a mascot has meant that these, Japanese gaming studios and, anime houses, et cetera, are like, oh yeah, you guys already have something that we can work with here. And that's just been a very, happy accident of the times.
Yep. So I think, first-time founders think about product, second-time founders think about distribution. I think one of the other aspects of Berachain, when we started getting to know you guys, was that there's actually a lot of substance behind the mask, behind the bear. Maybe let's talk a little bit about the team and how you guys are working, some of the things that are upcoming. There's a lot of substance there.
Yeah, man. The team stays low-key, but every now and then hop in the spotlight. Most of us have had backgrounds most of us have been building or scaling companies for the better part of our lives, right? So my background was first in healthcare/biotech and drug discovery. My co-founder Papa's background was in medical devices. We studied engineering at the University of Waterloo. We've sort of seen our time, and then have also worked in VC and have helped deploy capital into meaningful deals for a long time, and have also been in and out of crypto since 2015. But we are by far, the least competent members of the team. At least I am. We're supplemented by a number of folks who have been in and out of the industry and who have just had ridiculous amounts of scar tissue that allow us to keep on doing our jobs with the right guardrails and help us fill in those blanks. And I think the biggest sort of uniting factor that I've seen is selecting for people who don't need a job. I think that the way that a lot of the team has come together is there's a number of past founders, there's a number of people who have built and exited companies, there's people who have chips on their shoulder, who are incredibly competitive, and take extreme ownership or accountability of whatever they want to do. And I think that there's also a lot of folks who just like want to win really bad. And I think that it's very tough to put that into exact words, because it's not just about the pedigree. It's not like, oh, I spent this many years at Stellar or at Polygon or at Ripple or whatever it might be. It's like, oh, I'm someone who has that dog in them to a ridiculous extent. And I think that is tough to empirically categorize, but very easy to recognize when you see it enough times. And I think that what we've really tried to do is to not compromise on that in the slightest. And that if there's someone who we think is holding down the group, they're cut. And I think the goal is that every time we bring on a new team member, they're there to increase the average quality of the team, such that over time, more and more and more, we just trend towards excellence, right?
Couldn't agree more. Last question, last minute. Let's talk through some of the apps they're building on Berachain. There's some pretty interesting ones that are up and coming, but what are some of the most favorite ones that you've been following?
Oh man, I gotta pick favorite kids. The ecosystem has been such a pleasure to work with. Just for context, right? There's over 300 applications building on Berachain. That's kind of a meme because there was always lots of apps on some chains. But out of those, I actually believe there's like 50 to 60 very high quality teams. And I believe the market thinks so as well, because there's already been about $75 million in venture capital invested into the ecosystem prior to launch. Right. So on one hand, I think there's like this. There's probably a barbell in that on one hand there's very funky, cool new DeFi stuff, and there's stuff that people would now call consumer, which I think is a horrible word. But I would just say is like crypto that people might be able to use. So on the DeFi side, there's very cool ideas like exponents and concrete, for example. Exponents allows you to effectively directionally incentivize long or shorting of tokens with perps for the first time. So you can actually basically have almost like community wars. So you could have a bonk whiff pair and have people bribing you to go long on bonk, short on whiff, vice versa, which I think will open up some very fun new games in the altcoin space. There's teams like Concrete Finance, which I've always been incredibly impressed by. Oxford Surgeon turned 0.72 VP, turned deep DeFi DGen, building credit default swaps on chain, and advanced interest rate derivatives and structured products, launching natively on Berachain. There's groups that are then on like the wackier, most fun consumer side of things that I am very excited to see proliferate. There's, for example, Over Under, which is building computer vision powered, automatic odd generation and betting on Twitch streams. So something that could very easily reach hundreds of thousands of users and have deep cultural fits. There's Puffpaw, which has recently seen some notoriety in their quit smoking / vape to earn DPIN model. The team has shipped tens of millions of vapes in the past and is incredibly competent and has been killing it on the branding side. There's a company called Stablehold that will be joining us soon, or as I call it, the Horse Hedge Fund. That'll be very fun. That'll involve tokenizing, a horse's stable's winnings, along with breeding rights to horses in the future, which we think will be incredibly interesting. There's one that we can't decide whether to call it jerk to earn or urine to earn. That'll be on the sexual fi / deepin space. I don't think I need to explain that one much further. And there's one that I think will be, absolute cream of the crop called Frequency, which is an L2 built by repeat founders of Virgin Galactic Gaming, et cetera, who are bringing tens of millions of users and actually player liquidity on chain. And for the first time, building an L2 to Berachain that allows you to effectively cross-pollinate players between different applications coming onto the network, including ones that have tens of millions of existing Web2 users. So we see all these as incredible funnels to just bring so much value to the Bera ecosystem. And of course, they're supplemented by a number of just like the very strong Bera native DeFi apps like Infrared, Kodiak, Gummy, and countless more. So we are just, I don't know, we're very fortunate to have our builders. I don't know how I could find a better group. I'm going to keep trying, but I might not be lucky. We just do our best to help them win. That's our job. We're not supposed to be the main characters. We're just supposed to be in the bleachers helping alongside.
I love it. Well, I think the takeaway is Berachain, full of culture, all kinds. Well, with that, thanks so much. This has been great. On to the next one.